across my constituency provide a commendably high standard of education. In the Cheshire East local authority area, 87% of children now attend schools rated good or outstanding compared to 73% in 2010. Of course, much of the credit for that goes to dedicated staff at schools and strong leadership by head teachers. But as education ministers know from a dialogue we've now been having for some years, those same head teachers say that this is in spite of acute funding pressures. Now, to be fair, I do want to thank the education ministers and the school minister sitting here in particular for having listening ears. 2 years ago, they raised the per-pupil funding level in senior schools to a figure of £4,800, which was the exact amount the head teachers in my constituency requested. And yes, total funding for Cheshire East schools is rising by £10.4 million over the 2 years 2018 to 20. But that figure factors in increased pupil numbers, which are disproportionately high due to the high new house builds. And yes, an additional £1.6 million high needs funding is being added over the same 2 years, but this is woefully insufficient to meet current additional needs, causing distress, as I've seen in my surgeries, to parents, to pupils and to teachers. And yes, an additional £3.8 million funding is being added through the growth premises and mobility factors of the national funding formula in 2019-20, and an additional £10.4 million pupil premium funding will be received by schools as a result of that having been introduced, as we've heard, by the coalition government. I recognise all this, but head teachers repeatedly tell me that they simply cannot provide the level of education they aspire to due to funding pressures. Here is what one wrote to me, who said, "The parlous funding situation which envelopes us is a depressingly serious threat to the breadth, range and quality of education that we are able to offer." Now, I do want to thank the Secretary of State for Education for writing to me just last week, acknowledging, and I quote, he said, "I very much recognise the financial constraints that schools face," and adding, "There is clearly much more still to do." So I hope ministers will take away from this debate points raised by colleagues across the House, because if the spending review is the key determinant of spending for government, then I hope this debate will strengthen education as ministers' arms, because I do believe that they do have listening ears, to set out a strong case for much improved education funding and open the Treasury's eyes and ears to what is being said in this chamber today. I said in one of the debates that I've spoken in on this subject not long ago, the one about, I think it was the one about 8 weeks ago in Westminster Hall, that very, very politely and courteously, that we actually had the wrong minister in front of us, and I still think that is the case today. We need a Treasury minister in front of us, and perhaps we need to think about some sort of creative title for a debate on school funding that will ensure that that happens. In closing, can I just raise 3 points which head teacher Ed O'Neill of Eton Bank Senior School wrote to me following another debate, a Westminster Hall debate, which I spoke on. And he wanted to comment on 3 issues following the Minister's response to the debate. He said that the Minister made no mention of the ludicrous situation of short-termism in financial planning. We've heard about this already today in this chamber. This position is untenable for schools. As school leaders, we need to have a greater degree of certainty over the longer-term health of school finances so that we can budget and plan accordingly. Secondly, he says, no matter what the overarching increase that is quoted from the DfE, the funding is not good enough. From a secondary school perspective, the variance between Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 weightings needs changing. It is no less challenging to provide for a student aged 11 to 14 than for a student aged 14 to 16. The allocation to Key Stage 3 pupils needs to be significantly improved. And thirdly, the poor funding for post-16 students is crippling provision and opportunity. Post-16 education is desperately underfunded. Added to the additional and historic financial underfunding pressures schools in Cheshire East face, schools' sixth forms are struggling to maintain viability. It is a very real possibility that schools across this borough will fairly quickly be forced to start closing down their sixth form provision.
Ambos Chair Ambos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.